Right now, forecasters are counting down to the exact moment Britain's stubborn high pressure finally breaks. And when it does, the maps aren't going to show a normal end of heatwave shower. They're going to show something considerably more alarming. The kind of warning shading that grabs attention for good reason. That sounds like an overreaction, right? A heatwave ending usually means relief, not danger. Let's be fair to that assumption first, because normally it's correct. When a run of hot weather in Britain finally breaks, the standard script is simple. A few days of cloud, some scattered showers, temperatures easing back toward average without much drama. That's not the setup unfolding this time. And the difference is exactly what's worth counting down to. This particular breakdown is arriving on top of ground that spent nearly 3 weeks baking under exceptional heat with barely any meaningful rain. So let's build this the way forecasters actually have. One data point at a time. High pressure has dominated the UK for an extended stretch, keeping skies clear and temperatures consistently above average. That's the exact mechanism behind most OF Britain's longest hot spells. It blocks the usual parade of Atlantic weather systems, leaving the same dry, settled conditions parked over the country day after day. And that kind of pattern doesn't just heat the air. It bakes the ground underneath it. Nearly 3 weeks, with barely a drop of meaningful rain, leaves soil across large parts of England hard, almost impenetrable to water. Forecasters now expect that high pressure to finally weaken, with cooler air arriving and a shift toward unsettled conditions through the final stretch of the month. But here's the twist. Temperatures are set to climb once more before that shift fully takes hold, then give way to a broader spell of showers and thunderstorms. One more warm push before the real breakdown. That back and forth is exactly the kind of pattern that catches people off guard. It's easy to assume the heat is simply continuing as normal, right up until the moment the whole system flips. This isn't heading toward gentle relief. It's heading toward a specific, well-documented hazard that meteorologists have watched play out repeatedly in past British summers. Picture it. Torrential rain falling onto ground that's been scorched dry for weeks. That ground can't absorb it the way healthy, moist soil normally would. Instead of soaking in, the water runs straight off the surface, gathering speed and volume as it goes. Meteorologists have flagged exactly this scenario before. Baked, sun-hardened soil essentially behaves like pavement once heavy rain finally arrives, sending water rushing into drains, roads, and low-lying areas far faster than the system can handle. That's precisely why the Met Office has previously needed to issue danger to life. Warnings specifically during the transition out of a prolonged dry spell, not during an ordinary summer downpour. The danger isn't really about the rain total, it's about where that rain lands. Because this isn't hypothetical. In similar previous events, some regions saw between 70 and 100 millimeters of rainfall within just a few hours once a comparable heat-to-storm transition arrived. Sit with that for a second. That's well over a month's typical rainfall compressed into a single morning. And forecasters in those events specifically described conditions as hard to pinpoint, since thunderstorms of this intensity can vary enormously over a very short distance. One neighborhood stays completely dry. Another, just a few miles away, faces genuine flash flooding just within the same hour. Now let's bring in the historical evidence, because this exact heat-to-flood handoff has played out before, and the pattern is remarkably consistent. In a previous summer with a similarly prolonged dry spell, official drought status was declared across multiple regions of England, parts of the southwest, southeast, and East Anglia, just days before intense thunderstorms arrived. When that rain landed, forecasters warned it wouldn't be enough to end the drought, even as it simultaneously triggered flash flooding, severe enough to flood homes, businesses, and even a cinema ceiling in one widely reported case. Sit with that paradox. A place can be in official drought and facing a genuine flood emergency in the very same week. Water companies in that stretch had already imposed hosepipe restrictions before the storms even arrived, a clear sign of how depleted reservoir and groundwater levels had become. Torrential rain falling on top of that kind of shortage doesn't fix it. It just adds an entirely separate emergency on top. A separate comparable summer produced an amber danger to life warning covering London and the southeast, with forecasters noting that some communities were likely to become cut off entirely if roads flooded, a severity level rare enough that meteorologists specifically flagged how unusual it was to see London under that alert. So what's the actual range of outcomes forecasters are weighing this time? On the milder end, scattered showers, a handful of localized thunderstorms, welcome and gradual relief, no serious flooding risk. On the more severe end, the kind of setup that's produced amber alerts before, torrential downpours concentrated over a short window, dumping enough rain on hardened ground to trigger fast-moving surface water flooding, especially across the east and southeast, where the dry spell has been most intense. Wind is a secondary factor worth watching too, since past comparable transitions have brought gusts strong enough to bring down tree branches and disrupt power. Thunderstorms forming along this kind of sharp temperature boundary don't just bring rain, they bring the full package: lightning, hail, and sudden gusty winds together. Current forecasts suggest northern parts of the UK are most likely to see the wettest, most unsettled conditions through the end of July into August, while southern and southeastern England may hold on to drier, brighter conditions for longer. That regional split matters. It changes exactly where the flash flood risk concentrates once the pattern shifts. This is exactly the kind of signal meteorologists watch closely, without treating any single forecast as locked in. The precise timing and intensity can shift right up until the storms are already forming, since so much depends on how quickly that high pressure retreats. I cover breakdowns exactly like this one almost every time a prolonged dry spell finally gives way, because this transition period has repeatedly proven more disruptive than the heat wave that preceded it. Let's also be honest about what forecasters simply can't promise this far out. Nobody can say today exactly which towns will see an amber warning, or precisely how many millimeters will fall in any specific hour. That street-level precision only becomes possible once storms are actually forming and radar can track them directly. What forecasters can do right now is flag the broad risk pattern days in advance, which is exactly what's happening. Here's a genuinely speculative angle, and I want to be upfront. It's an active area of ongoing research, not settled fact. Some climate scientists studying compound heat drought extremes have found that events combining extreme heat with rapid drought are becoming measurably more common worldwide, and that the transition out of these events tends to bring harder, faster rainfall rather than the gentle soaking rain that dry soil actually needs. The physics is straightforward. Warmer air holds more moisture. So when rain finally breaks through a hot and dry pattern, it increasingly arrives in short, intense bursts. That broader research doesn't specifically predict this exact week in Britain, and scientists don't all agree yet on how strongly that global trend applies to any single regional event. I'm including it because it's useful context for why this kind of transition has been showing up more often in recent British summers, not because it's a certainty here. So here's what this countdown actually means for you over the coming days, especially if you live in England's southeast. Treat the end of this heat wave as an active weather event worth tracking, not the point where you stop worrying. Keep your Met Office alerts on through the transition, even once temperatures start dropping. Based on past events, the most disruptive window often arrives, right as the pattern breaks, not during the heat itself. If you live near a low-lying road, an underpass, or an area with a history of surface flooding, have a plan ready before the rain, not once it's falling. Baked ground sheds water fast, and drainage routes that normally cope can be overwhelmed within minutes. If you've got a basement, garage, or storage area prone to water intrusion, move valuable or sentimental items to higher ground now. Sandbags or flood barriers, if you own them, go up before the first heavy band arrives. Avoid driving through standing or fast-moving floodwater if warnings are active, even if it looks shallow. A small amount of fast-flowing water can move a car, and depth is notoriously hard to judge from behind the wheel. Check on elderly or vulnerable neighbors, specifically during this transition, since sudden flooding combined with possible power cuts can leave people isolated fast. A quick check-in costs nothing and can matter enormously. Keep a charged phone and backup power ready too, since comparable UK storms have caused localized outages alongside the flooding. And if your area has been under drought restrictions, don't assume one heavy storm resolves that shortage, even if it floods your street. One intense burst of rain can flood roads and still leave reservoirs well below where they need to be. That distinction matters for how you think about water use, even after the storms pass. The bigger lesson from this whole countdown: a heat wave breaking doesn't mean the weather threat is over. Sometimes it just means the danger changes shape, from slow-building heat stress to a fast, sudden flooding hazard triggered by the very ground the heat spent weeks drying out. Once you see it that way, storm warnings appearing right. As a long heat wave ends, stop looking like bad luck. They start looking like exactly what dry, hardened ground does the moment intense rain finally hits it. A predictable handoff, not a coincidence. If breakdowns like this help, you see these transitions coming instead of getting caught off guard, hit subscribe now, because the moment this pattern breaks, I'll be back with the real numbers on exactly where the worst of it lands.